What terrible dread could drive a mother to not only take her own life, but also that of her child? What looming fate could be so horrific that she would choose death to avoid it? In the bleak chill of a December morning in 1803, 60 Greek women found themselves in this very situation. Trapped on a remote mountain, with hundreds of vengeful Ottoman soldiers in pursuit, there was no longer anywhere left to run or hide. Their husbands and brothers had been killed in battle or captured. Their ancestral homes had been stolen or destroyed. All hope was truly lost. Now facing a life of slavery and all of the abuses and humiliations that such a fate would entail, the women clutched their children in their arms one final time, approached the edge of the steep cliff, and prepared to jump, bringing to a close the final act of a tragic and dark tale of betrayal, ambition, and defiance that would become legend. The rise of one empire more often than not results in the decline of another. For one people to ascend, another must fall. Such was the case in Anatolia and Greece in the 15th century, when the rapidly growing Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople and finally brought down the declining Byzantine Empire, the last holdout of the Romans. In the years that followed, the Ottomans pushed deep into southeastern Europe, swallowing up lands that had been inhabited by the Greeks for thousands of years, and by 1500, virtually all of Greece had been conquered. The ancient and proud Greeks found themselves treated as second-class citizens in their ancestral homelands. However, the fire of resistance remained burning within the hearts of many. Tired of living under the yoke of their new Turkish masters, a small group of refugees fled to a remote, mountainous region of Epirus known as Suliot. These independent-spirited castaways couldn't have chosen a more perfect spot to establish new homes from which to resist and defy Ottoman rule. Protected by steep, towering mountain cliffs that rose into the heavens, the settlements they carved out in the harsh wilderness were essentially impregnable castles forged by Mother Nature herself. The treacherous, narrow, rocky approaches that any invading army would have to traverse acted as perfect ambush spots and nullified any advantage in numbers that the enemy might possess. Even modern weaponry such as the powerful cannons that had brought down the mighty walls of Constantinople would be useless here. The lumbering, heavy contraptions ill-suited for travel across such a hostile landscape. The inhabitants of these fortress-like communities in the mountains became known as the Suliots, and between the 17th and 19th centuries, they created what was essentially their own autonomous confederacy deep within the territory of the Ottoman Empire. The Suliots managed their own affairs largely free from any interference from Ottoman authorities, and not only did they refuse to pay taxes to the empire, but they also began demanding tribute from Ottoman Turks living in the surrounding area, giving them the hard currency required to purchase weapons and supplies abroad, armaments that would be desperately needed if they were to preserve their autonomy. When the community was founded at some time around 1600, it consisted of just a handful of families. However, their fame quickly spread. A flood of Greek immigrants poured in from neighbouring provinces, these refugees within their own country, attracted by the enviable freedoms the Suliots enjoyed. In the mountains of Epirus, a Greek no longer had to fear the abuses of the occupying Ottomans. He could live his own life free from foreign influence, and be the captain of his own destiny. 100 years later they numbered over 1,000, and by 1800 there are thought to have been between 10,000 and 20,000 Suliots, spread across a confederacy of over 60 villages. Several thousand of these armed men who were ready to fight at a moment's notice, and fight they would. The Ottomans were fully aware of the activities of this defiant band of Greeks in the mountains. They were not going to allow these openly rebellious subjects of the Sultan to just live as they pleased deep within the borders of their empire. In 1720 to 1785 alone, at least 6 separate military expeditions were dispatched to bring the Suliots to heel, each wave containing well-supplied armies of up to 10,000 soldiers. However, despite the Ottomans' possession of superior numbers and firepower, all 6 incursions would meet the same disastrous fate. Isolated deep in the mountains, every single Ottoman attack was decisively repulsed, with thousands of Ottoman soldiers cut down, injured, or captured. As wave after wave of Ottoman incursions was crushed, the fierce reputation of the Suliots grew, as did their power and territory. They were beginning to form a country within a country. The situation could no longer be ignored. It was time to root out and subdue these defiant Greeks once and for all. The man chosen for the job was the recently appointed Ali Pasha, the Ottoman governor of the region, who had been granted a great degree of autonomy by the Sultan. Ali Pasha was both ruthless and ambitious, and had built his power to such an extent that he was essentially the Ottoman king of much of modern-day Greece and Albania, answerable only to the Sultan himself. His rise to power in 1788 brought him into direct conflict with the Suliots, who were openly defying his authority and raiding his lands. He launched several military campaigns against the Suliots. However, like his predecessors, his efforts failed with thousands of casualties. Yet Ali Pasha was not the kind of man to simply give up. If he couldn't defeat his enemies through brute force alone, he would take a different approach. Rather than carrying out a direct assault, Ali instead began constructing towers and fortifications around the territory controlled by the Suliots, preventing anyone from getting in or out. For 2 years, the besieged Suliots suffered inside their open-air prison, as food and ammunition was depleted to dangerously low levels. Worn down by the long siege, the rock-solid unity of the Suliots began to crack. Ali Pasha wasted no time in exploiting this split. Seduced by hefty bribes and the promise of lucrative rewards after his victory, 2 of the most prominent chieftains within the Suliot community made a secret deal with their former Ottoman enemies and defected, withdrawing hundreds of their men and fatally weakening the Suliots' defense. Ali Pasha gleefully moved in to deliver the final blow. The Ottomans began an all-out attack on the 7 villages at the heart of the Suliots community, and following a fierce nighttime battle, the Suliots were forced to withdraw and abandon their homes. The survivors realized that their position was now untenable. The only options remaining were eradication or peace. On December 12, 1803, a treaty of surrender was signed, finally bringing to a close the centuries-old conflict between the Suliots and the Ottoman Empire. One of the main reasons the Greeks agreed to this treaty was Ali Pasha's guarantee of safe passage. He promised the proud Suliots that they would be allowed to leave with their weapons and relocate wherever they pleased unharmed by his soldiers. However, this promise was a deceitful ruse. He had no plans to allow this hated enemy, who had caused him so much trouble and humiliation, to simply get up and leave. He could not allow a group of people who had proven themselves so dangerous and defiant to carry on living within his territory. After all, they might very well take up arms against him again in the future. He secretly issued orders to his men to violate the treaty and attack the unprepared Suliots while they were evacuating. All of the men were to be killed, while the women and children were to be taken as slaves. Unaware of the danger they were in, after signing the peace treaty, the Suliots split into 3 groups and began the journey to their new homes. 2 of the groups managed to escape the Ottoman troops sent to destroy them. However, one convoy of refugees was cornered and attacked on December 16, 1803. In the ensuing ambush, the outnumbered Suliots fought bravely. However, they stood no chance against Ali Pasha's superior forces. With most of the men killed in the fighting, about 60 women and children found themselves trapped between the advancing Ottoman soldiers and the steep mountain cliff at their back. In desperation and panic, the women edged closer and closer to the cliff, fully aware of the terrible fate that would await female captives should the Ottomans take them alive. Seeing their quarry cornered and with nowhere else to run or hide, Ali Pasha's men charged forward, eager to claim the female prize. It was now that the Greek women seemed to have come to a remarkable unanimous decision. Peering over the cliff at the great abyss below, they decided that death for themselves and their children would be a mercy. A quick and hopefully painless end, preferable to a long and terrible life of slavery, suffering, and humiliation. All 60 women took their children in their arms one last time, turned to the cliff's edge, and prepared to jump. One account describes how the women held hands while singing and dancing before leaping from the mountain into the chasm below. Suleiman Aga, an Ottoman officer and eyewitness to the event, would later describe what he saw that day. Quote, "The women held hands and started a dance which was driven by unusual heroism, with the fear of death emphasizing its rhythm. At the end, exhausted, the women make a permeating and long cry, with its echoes extinguished in the depths of a terrifying cliff, where they all fell together with their children." Later known as the Dance of Zalongo, the story of this incredible mass act of defiance and self-sacrifice spread across Greece and Europe like wildfire, and it became an almost myth-like legend around which Greek independence fighters would rally for decades after. In fact, the tale became so popular with Greeks that it would be emulated on several occasions over the coming years, as more and more women chose death over slavery at the hands of the Ottomans. During the later Greek War of Independence in the early 1820s, 13 women leapt from a hilltop with their children in their arms when their city fell to Ottoman forces, following the example of the 60 Suli women at Zalongo. The Dance of Zalongo would go on to be commemorated in famous paintings, books, and music, where they would for all time serve as a reminder of the independent spirit and iron defiance of the Suliots, and in 1961 a huge monument was installed at the very site at which the women are said to have jumped from. Following the fall of the Suliots, the survivors fled to other regions of Greece, and many would live to fight their old Ottoman enemies once again during the Greek War of Independence in 1821, when after a bitter 8-year-long struggle, the Greeks finally won their freedom and broke away from the Ottoman Empire. As for the victorious Ali Pasha, his deception would be repaid in full, and the man who imagined himself a king would meet a sudden and brutal downfall due to his naked ambition. Fearful that the governor of Greece was becoming too influential, the Ottoman Sultan declared Ali Pasha a rebel and ordered his arrest. Now an outlaw, after several battles, Ali Pasha was betrayed by his own men and handed over to Ottoman forces, where he was promptly executed along with his 3 sons and grandson, barely 20 years after his own betrayal of the Suliots resulted in the demise of the 60 women and their children at the tragic Dance of Zalongo. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope to see you again soon.